want to introduce Jennifer Rabb, who's the president of Hunter College, our host.
Thank you so much. I am Jennifer Rabb. I have the extraordinary privilege to be the president of the phenomenal institution, Hunter College, where the wonderful Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute is located. Hunter is so very proud to partner with the Brookings Institution, and when asked today to host this conference, we said there could be no more perfect place. Hunter is part of the City University system, which proves that the American dream can still come true. And we were a system built on the issue you're discussing today. We were a higher education system built in a municipality for immigrants. And so many of our students over the years since the 1870s were refugees. And today, where 1 in every 5 of our students was not born in the United States, we are showing that immigration works, and higher education works, and the American dream can still come true. So what a perfect place to have this conversation, and what a perfect building to host this discussion. This was, as some of you have heard, the home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. It was a wedding present from Franklin's mother, built in 1908, and she just had one stipulation when she presented it to the newlyweds. She kept this half of it for herself. We like to call it the first New Deal. And Eleanor would say she never knew where she would see Sarah day or night. So if anyone here thinks they had mother-in-law problems, think what that would be like. The Roosevelts lived here. They were in Albany. They were in Washington. The house becomes very important in 1921. Why? Because that's when Roosevelt is stricken with polio. And Sarah had the foresight, something unusual in 1908, to have an elevator in this house. So Roosevelt comes back here. He puts together his political career. He runs for governor. And then this was the home in which he puts together his plans to become president. On November 8th, 1932, comes back from the Biltmore Hotel, president-elect, with his mom on the stairs where you walked in today, saying this was the happiest day of my life. History buffs here remember that the inauguration in those days was not until March. So from November to March, Roosevelt planned the New Deal here. The room upstairs was where Frances Perkins was invited and asked to be the first woman cabinet secretary. When Roosevelt committed to her, he would create a social safety net, which then becomes Social Security. So how wonderful to have you here in the house of the founders of the UN. The UN, of course, was FDR's dream, and Eleanor was the first commissioner of human rights, drafted the Declaration of Human Rights, and had such an extraordinary vision on the issues that you're talking about today. We can feel her spirit in this room as you convene on these incredibly important topics. So to Brookings, thank you for your very important work, and most importantly, thank you for inviting. We have a number of students here, and nothing could be more meaningful to me. Our motto is Mihi Cura Futuri, the care of the future is mine, and what the conversation you're having here today, and to be able to engage the future, our students in it, is deeply meaningful, and I thank you for that all. Welcome.
So for this panel, no pressure, right? This is the House, Social Security, New Deal. We'll just figure all this out.
The care of the future.
The care of the future. We've got the right moderator, however, to take us through this. Lara Satrakian founded the Syria Deeply website in 2012, I believe. Award-winning journalist, someone we greatly admire at Brookings. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's an honor to be here. I'd like to congratulate Bruce on his scholarship and research and thought leadership in this space, and his team for bringing together a tremendous set of voices, and thank you, of course, to Hunter for having us here. I am humbled by the people we're going to hear from. The Honorable Mayor Yorgos Kaminis from Athens, Michael Berkowitz, president of the 100 Resilient Cities program, which, among other things, is become an incredible forum for the sharing of lessons and challenges and actual network of ideas flowing around the world. Volker Turk, who oversees a tremendous scope of work as the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection at UNHCR. And Mazen Darwish, who is a hero to many. I know, I was debating with myself whether to embarrass him with admiration, and I decided to go for it. He's a human rights lawyer, activist, advocate, a celebrated voice for freedom of expression, and was in Syria until recently, just 10 months ago, relocated to Germany, and represents the best values of his country to a great many people I know. So I'll let you recover from that blast of compliments while we begin the conversation. As you've now heard, some 60% of refugees and 80% of internally displaced people live in urban environments. That makes for millions of people. But I'd like you just to think for a moment at the level of the individual. There's a moment when a refugee becomes a resident of a given city, sometimes moving from one city to the next, but at that moment they become part of the urban community. Their long-term integration, their sense of belonging and inclusion within a metropolis dictates not only their experience of the city, but the city's experience of them and of the cohort that may have come with them from a given country or context. If integration policies are successful, they can unlock decades of prosperity for the individual and for the city. If they fail, if city leaders don't have the strategies or the resources and capabilities to cope with the influx, then it can breed dangerous conditions for unrest, violence, and communal tension. And of course, not only from the refugee communities, but also from those who feel disenfranchised by the process. I thought it was remarkable in Roger's facilitation of the last panel how much the so-called short-term or immediate response, the first steps taken to accommodate, have clear long-term implications. So in a way, our conversations have fused and overlapped in a way that really reflects how things work. There's so much to talk about. Bruce has written a paper that identifies the 7 major tasks of integration: housing, education, security, labor and language training, healthcare, and neighborhood services. I wish we could get to the bottom of each of them. We're at least going to hear about some of them. It's even difficult to choose, because I thought about this a lot, where to begin the conversation. So let's start with Mayor Kaminis. You have, by some estimates, 60,000 Syrians who wanted to transit through your country and are now, by some narratives, stuck in your country. Some even call Greece now a holding pen. I don't know how you feel about that language. How do you provide for those who've come in now and many who are in your city?
Well, to tell you the truth, in a year, we had 900,000 people passing from Greece and crossing the northern border. So now those people are stuck because in March, the borders closed, the border with Fyrom, Serbia, Bulgaria. Well, most of them, they're not all Syrians. Maybe less than half of them are Syrians. The other are Iraqi, people from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and other countries. So most of them are candidates for the relocation program. And 60,000 for my country.
Within Europe, relocation within Europe.
Yes, relocation within Europe. 60,000 for my country, it's a manageable number. And but the relocation program does not work. It has proved till now to be a failure. Only 3,000 people have been relocated till now. So what we did from the very first beginning, you know, being a mayor, either you choose to become a populist leader and say, I don't want them in my city, but you don't have any other solution than to promote integration. There's no intermediate solution because the problem is there. And it's a holistic problem. You have those people who arrive desperate, most of them, many of them in depression. And the reality is that they don't want to stay in Greece. Why? Because Greece is in a very deep economic crisis. It's in its 8th year of recession. So most of them, they want to leave Greece and go to other European countries, mostly Germany, Sweden. So if someone does not want to get integrated, does not want to see, there you have the first problem. And the second problem is that they feel that they are candidates for the relocation scheme. So they see themselves as being, temporarily in Greece. Anyway, the first thing is schooling, because we had many, many children that arrived in Athens, and some of them for 2 or 3 years, they have not attended school. So the first thing was schooling. There, I think the government has done a good job. Most of those children are going to school. But finding jobs, and I agree, first you have to find a job, and then you start lessons, or at the same time, as our German friend said before. Now, finding jobs is something very, very difficult nowadays in Greece, because we already have an unemployment rate of more than 25%, and among young people, more than 50%. So you can understand how difficult it is for those people to find a job. But the answer is synergies. You have to bring all the forces of the city together. With the NGOs, some of them do a very good job. With the academia, because they can help you find solutions. And we already, in Greece, since we have this crisis in a crisis, we already had some structures ready of emergency relief to provide shelter to those people. So now, to tell you the truth, we are in a pre-integration phase, because most of these people have arrived very, very recently in Greece, and as I said, most of them, they want to leave.
How do you house them?
Well, for the time being, we have most of them living in refugee camps. The first refugee camp was created in Athens. I'm very proud to say so. And the second, we have about 3,000 or 4,000 people living in apartments. But we have to be inventive and try to find, smart solutions. What do I mean by that? Those people go and find apartments, but no, in reality, they don't find the apartments. We find them for them. In the areas where there are already migrants there, and where the rents are very cheap. So the risk of creating ghettos there is a present risk. On the other hand, it's almost impossible to find the means, the financial means, to find apartments in other neighborhoods. So what do you do? And in my opinion, we must be more inventive. I mean, in those neighborhoods now where they tend to go, we have many empty apartments because they are neighborhoods that for many years were in decline. So it would be very smart to give incentives to young Greek students, young people, young couples, to go there, live. And at the same time, it's a win-win situation for everyone. For young couples that don't have the means, for the neighborhoods where you have mixed populations and you don't create ghettos. And but you cannot find a way to finance this because all the financial tools have as direct beneficiaries refugees. Here the refugees are not the direct beneficiaries, but they are the indirect beneficiaries, and the whole city with them. So we have to be more inventive in some aspects. Well,
on so many levels, and
yes.
There's a lot to get into there. But Volker, you see this all through a global lens. In contexts like Athens, where goodwill outstrips capacity in a way, financing, how things need to be created. What worries you most when it comes to the protection of communities? What are the risks that we slip into when you have so many people packed into places where there aren't enough resources?
Well, obviously, in urban areas there are huge opportunities, and I think one really has to start with those and also focus on those, both for the host communities and for the refugees themselves. And it's interesting because some of the countries that are most affected by refugee movements are obviously the ones neighboring Syria. Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey. And most of these refugees are not in camps. They are actually living in urban areas. And if one creates a situation that is win-win, where you can actually prove that if you invest in the host communities you also, I mean, if you invest in refugees, you also have benefits for the host communities. Just to give you a couple of examples, healthcare. We know that the Lebanese poor have more or less the same difficulties that refugees have when it comes to access to healthcare, even access to education. So if you actually, through funding, which we now get from the World Bank, yesterday there was this launch of the concessional financing facility for middle-income countries, which did not exist before, you actually are able to both resolve your own problems of the urban poor, Lebanese citizens, by actually making sure that they also benefit from the facilities that are put in place for refugees. And I think in Europe, that's still the lesson to be learned. I think we have seen a number of good examples. Europe did not have to deal with massive population movements for quite some time. I mean, although history teaches us, let's not forget, in the wake of the Second World War, we had 60 million people on the move in Europe, sometimes forgotten in the public discussion today. It's sort of seen as if there were never any refugee movements in Europe. That's why the 51 Convention was created in the first place. But in the recent history, political leaders, even mayors, did not have to deal with that phenomenon in the same way as they have to deal with it now. And I think they can actually learn a lot from what is happening in the global south. And of course, we are thrilled with the New York a couple of days ago by the leaders. It's very much the macro picture, but we can hopefully translate it into the local communities, because that's where the real action starts. The local leaders and the mayors play an incredibly important role for that.
So back to the mechanics for a moment, where Mayor Kaminis and others are trying to figure out who does what. What role does UNHCR play? What role does civil society play? What role do federal, city-level governments play? And, what are the various combinations you see that are working well?
I think it depends, again, on the context. In Europe, we have become operational again. We didn't have to. I mean, for a long time, because we were hoping that the European Union in particular was able to respond. It was not the case, so we had no choice, despite some very severe funding constraints that the organization faced. We had to become operational because the humanitarian imperative was so big. Which means that, for instance, in Greece, working very closely with the local authorities, both with, for instance, municipality of Athens, but Thessaloniki, to really help, for instance, working with Airbnb, with the private sector, linking up the private sector to find accommodation, to ensure that local service providers, local NGOs, become aware of the refugee issue and expand their services to them. So obviously an infusion of financing was very important. Since we have the previous High Commissioner, Mr. Guterres, in fact, he launched a couple of years ago, in fact very early on in 2000, I remember it was in 2009, the first dialogue with mayors around the world. We actually brought together and hosted a meeting, the High Commissioner's Dialogue in Geneva, on urban refugees, where mayors from all around the world came together, and we managed to link some of them up. I know that a number of initiatives, which I'm sure you will talk about, sort of show that linking up mayors, creating a network, actually showing that political leadership can really help if it's done not through populism and demagogy, but through creating these win-win situations and these opportunities, that actually is the way to go forward.
Michael, you lead the 100 Resilient Cities program, which is meant to shore up resilience on many fronts for urban areas. Can you share a little bit about how that work began to move into the refugee crisis response?
Yeah, I think the idea of urban resilience is that you see the interconnection between all of your challenges, between both the shocks, the sudden disasters, things like earthquake, hurricane, tornado, terrorism, flood, and the long-term stresses, chronic things that challenge cities, things like long-term food, water, and energy shortage, high levels of crime and violence, shifting macroeconomic trends that disadvantage a city for one reason or another. And the refugee crisis is somewhere in the middle, and it's interesting. Is it a shock or a stress? Maybe it doesn't matter that much. I think what more resilient cities try to do is they try to see the opportunity in connecting what they're doing for multiple of those challenges. And that's what Volker just said really resonates with me. It's finding the connection between, so I'll just give you an example. When Paris applied to our program in 2014, Anne Hidalgo is a very environmental mayor. She wanted to talk about the environment, about urban heat island, about river flooding, about air pollution. And then 2015 happened. She had 2 terrorist attacks and a refugee and migrant crisis sweep Europe. And all of a sudden you needed to talk about what it meant to be French and Parisian and European. And what we're trying to get the city of Paris and many other cities that are in the network to see is, how do you find the interconnection between these two seemingly unconnected both challenges and opportunities? How do you leverage every single euro you spend to meet the commitments of COP21 to further create integration between the city of Paris and its isolated suburbs? Through new zoning, through better transportation, through programmatic work. How can you tune up the integration elements of these environmental interventions in a way that makes Paris stronger, regardless of what the next challenge is? And so that's really what resilience thinking tries to do. It tries to understand where the connections between those things are.
You brought together mayors in Athens to talk about the refugee stresses, I mean, not to use that word, in particular, the refugee factor and coping mechanisms. Any lessons from that? What was shared?
So I think one thing, I'll give you a couple of high-level lessons. One thing is that cities struggle with integration. And I'm not talking now about integration of new people into cities, but rather the integration of the various agencies and organizations and sectors that are working in them, from the international community to the national governments, the cities, to the various silos within city governments. You look at all of the services that are available to vulnerable populations of all kinds, refugees, migrants, and others. Often we find, and we find this in Brownsville here in New York, that the different organizations are not talking to each other. They don't share budget and programmatic stuff in the right way. And that leads to a significantly suboptimal experience for the refugees, or vulnerable populations, or whoever you're trying to target. And so finding better ways to integrate that thinking between transportation and economic development and social service organizations in the right way is one of the things that really came out of this. The second is, again, this is a governance challenge. We all, and I know Brookings and Bruce are doing a really interesting piece of work around governance here. But we talk about when mayors rule the world, that cities are the right place to start, that mayors are the most practical, pragmatic, can-do kind of people, and that is definitely true. And yet, no mayor really controls his or her own destiny in terms of things they want to do. Even here in New York, the most powerful municipality in the world, but potentially, the mayor doesn't.
We certainly think so.
240,000 employees. They control the tap water from the reservoir all the way to the tap. Like lots of amazing, $75-80 billion annual budget. Like, this is an incredibly powerful municipality, and yet the mayor has to ask the governor to increase minimum wage, to fix the transportation system. The mayor has to work with the counties on really significant issues that impact the city's resilience. And so that's particularly true when you talk about refugees and migrants and in Europe or anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And so how do mayors both use hard and soft power, engage in coalition building, put the flag out there to say this is where we want to go, even if you don't entirely control your situation, so that you can drive the agenda? Because ultimately, you're the one who are going to be on the, mayors are going to be the ones who are going to be on the hook for solving those issues. And so I think those were two big themes that emerged. The third is, to Volker's point again, is that there's so much amazing learning between cities that can go on. And so one of the big learnings was between Medellin, Colombia, who has had over the last couple of decades, 700,000 internally displaced persons, with some of the countries in Europe that and cities in Europe that are now struggling with it. What are some really practical things? And you would think between different cities, global south, global north, different languages, different cultures, that these solutions wouldn't be portable. But when you get down to the actual doing of it, there's a lot of portability in what Medellin put in place, from something they call victim assistance units to something Europe is calling welcome centers. Like that is really brass tacks learning can go on. And that's the way cities can leapfrog each other and improve on what's going
Quick
on.
intervention, yes.
Only I remember now. Remember when we met in the Lake of Como?
Yeah.
Athens
Not
is
bad
member of
place.
the 100 resilient
Yes.
cities. So
It was a tour of duty that we both want to forget. Right, sir?
Anyway,
Sitting in Bellagio, yes. What happened? Tell us.
Sorry.
Tell us what happened in Bellagio.
anyway. Now in Bellagio started something very good and very interesting, because there I raised, as you remember, the refugee issue.
Yeah.
Because it was a year ago, September 2015, it was only a month that we had refugees arriving massively in Greece and in Athens. And so I told them it's an issue of resiliency also, the refugee issue. And the 100 resilient cities, they brought Mercy Corps there. Mercy Corps, and we started working together in Athens, and Mercy Corps, they brought their donors, which are big corporations and companies, and we started discussing about how to create jobs in Athens. So you see, through synergies, you create opportunities.
Definitely.
Network.
Oh,
Yes.
Mazen, yeah, Mazen, where do we begin? There's something about this axis of the conversation that I think is very powerful, in that, yes, a year ago, this became a European story. 5 or so years ago, in various manifestations, this was hitting cities like Lebanon, Tripoli, Gaziantep, creating cities like Zatari. So when you even talk about refugees and cities, we were talking, in a way, different refugees and different cities. And that's a sort of bigger, broader context. I'm embarrassed even to look at the former High Commissioner while I say this, because this was his life and his leadership. You now are part of the German Syrian contingent. Tell us a little bit about your experience. I know it was distinct. You told me your friend picked you up at the airport. It was a little different than most Syrian experiences going in. But and then I'd like to talk about the bigger Syrian refugee experience in the cities that you know.
Thank you. Actually, after all these deep talks from the expert and the two panel, I would like to share you some stories as a new refugee in Europe. Actually, I'm lucky. I didn't go through Greek or in the sea. Came in the airport directly from Beirut to Berlin. The German government offered to me a travel document, and a very wonderful German family picked up me from the airport directly to their house and stay in their house almost 3 months until I manage a flat for me. So really, I'm very lucky, and I'll be happy to share the name of this family, my new family in Germany, Marie Verburg and Michael Naumann. But this is not the story of the 100,000 of the other Syrian. They came through Greek and in many ways, and they are exhausted. They skipped from a war, ugly regime using even chemical weapons and aircraft against them. And some of them faces ISIS in their area and escape because they can't live in the mentality of ISIS. So those start in the high, in the shelter, in the Tempelhof, and the situation, it's not too much. I believe in the wishes. All have a good wishes for the refugee, for the Syrian, but really the reality is not same. In Greek, in some Heim in Germany, in many shelter, in many places, it's not wonderful, like as we hear. The story of integration starts from zero, everything. There is some stereotypic about the refugee, especially from the third world. Some people think that I came in the camel to Berlin. I try to explain to them I leave it in Damascus. Some of the brochure in the shelter showing with color picture how to use the WC.
How to use a toilet.
The toilet.
How to use the toilet brochure.
Yeah, with color picture.
Color pictures.
Yeah. Also, I try to explain to people that I'm very thankful. Usually, I washing my face in this place, and thanks for this color photos. You will have in the Heim also a brochure show you the good way to having sex.
Instructional booklets for
Instruction.
refugees.
And it's good because it's have color photos. One of these brochures said that sex prevent pleasure. And really, one of my friend very shocked. Also, he think he will come to Europe. It's open country and free life. And then he reads that in Arabic, that sex prevent pleasure. And when we go to the German text, it shows that sex give pleasure.
That's very weird.
So
It must have been a very interesting communication strategy meeting where they all sat down and decided on
yeah,
that.
it's only a point in the Arabic word between prevent and give. It's only a point. But a lot of work, a lot of strategy, a lot of plan, a lot of wonderful work from the civil society. Sometimes we lose all these efforts because small mistake. Some small sensitive about the culture and about the meaning of the word. Sometimes we lose all of this. And also put the refugee in bad situation in general. So I think it's very important to start sharing the refugee in this plan and in this strategy. Some of those refugees, they are expert. Even if they can't talk German fluent. Sorry, but it's really difficult language. But they're still expert. They should be shared in this strategy and the plan. They can help even the government to save money, to find the direct way how they can reach the refugee directly in good and respectable language and way. One small things, but it's a huge challenge. Nobody talk about it, but let me speak about the divided family in Europe, in Germany, in Europe. Some of this family succeed to reach Germany or other Europe country, apart from this family, but the other is still stuck in Greek or in Turkey, especially. One of my friend, his journalist writer, he and his son in Turkey, his son 5 years, and his wife, which poetry, with the daughter, which 3 years, in Germany. Now, 2 years in this situation, the family divided between two countries and can't work. And this is not a unique story. There is 1,000 of family in Germany and other country faces this problem, which really it's a disaster for the long term. I know there is, especially in Germany, they are very generous, and Angela Merkel show a very good commitment in the ethics and in the human rights issue. But we do it. We accept all these number, and we have all these problem, and we should find solution. Because each year, each day, the problem start to be a bump. A lot of story as a new refugee, even if I didn't face it directly, because as I said, I'm very lucky in this. Also, I'm, to be honest, Jewish German family. But the other, they are not. The integration, it's two sides. The new refugee, they should work in the language and the mentality, all these, leave their camel in the country, start to use the metro. But also, from other hand, the government, the society should also move one step minimum to those people. Especially the Syrian. Now 5 years from a miserable situation. It's a war, and as I said, especially the regime and the ISIS. People faces, which really I can't explaining with my poor English. But the society and the government should find some solution. A lot of good program, but in the bad way. The last example that in Berlin there is this, they have some kind of tour in the museum, in the land in the museum, and it's free, and they brought some Arabic leaders for the tour, explain about the even the Islamic and the Arab museum there, and it's very good. But I think the same program, it will be better if they took them to the parliament, to the mayor, to explain more about the political system, the mentality of the society, where we sharing the same value, where there is some conflict between even our culture and the idea. It's wonderful, but is this now the museum the good place to take them, or the mayor, or to the parliament, or to the political party in general? It's the same expensive, the same effort, but how we can use it in general.
So what are you teaching? What are you showing them? What messages are you sending them? What pamphlets are you printing for them? These subtle decisions shaping the refugee and relocation experience. There are at least 2 other pockets of the Syrian experience in Germany that's worth talking about. And of course, Germany's getting all the attention. In a way, it's the best and easiest place to study, and the lessons certainly do carry over. You and I have both been exposed to a lovely pocket of the Syrian experience, which is now a flourishing, young, intellectual life. And from Syria, where even the word intellectual was considered not negative, but stigmatized or politicized for so long. Now you have young people in a spirit of free expression and free exchange, the things that you have based your career on as an advocate, growing a new layer of dialogue and influence and media, there's a flourishing going on, and it's quite lovely, and they're absorbing certainly a lot of the German values, and you see that happening. And in another pocket, a sense that, my gosh, there is a risk, and it's active risk, that certain young people are slipping through the cracks, and that nothing is picking them up, and that there is a risk of Salafi extreme viewpoints actively targeting especially those young people who slip through the cracks. In a country where every good effort is being made and everything is being tried, they're still not only a risk, but a reality of those young people being targeted. How do you see that, and what could possibly be done to capture them from falling further?
Yeah, as you said, there is a lot of really successful story and wonderful value, which being in Germany or in Europe added to us. Last month I have a panel with the High Commissioner from the Foreign Ministry, and was very tough about the leak of European and German strategy, how to stop the war in Syria. And after I finish, I wait. Now they will pick up me, throw me out. The security service will came, and after 1 week, nothing happened. So,
Different world you're in.
yeah. For a person who visit the prison 6 months, 6 times in his last 15 years, it's a different story. Yeah. A lot of, as I told you, value we can learn, especially in Germany, this country which faces the 30-year war, which, apart from what happened in Syria, related. We can a lot of lessons we can learn. How to rebuild the country after the Second War, how to reconciliation with your past,
Absolutely.
about the Holocaust and what happened and all of these things. But also, as I said, those people coming exhausted, a lot of pain and a lot of angry. They feel that they left alone from the whole world, and this is not easy. They start refuse to even to listen the word human right. In the civil society, in the Syrian, so we spent last 20 years to display this value and this word to enter it to our culture. Now people have very aggressive. If just they hear this word and always say this is just a propaganda. Don't mention it. Don't say it. They will be very nervous. Those people faces also extreme Islamic Salafi, jihadi people, which they are since 30 or 40 years in Europe. They didn't came with the refugee. They based in Europe. They are organized. They have their tools. They have their way and network. And those youth and those people, they are easy hunt for them. So this is also one of the challenge, how we protect those people from this kind of black network or.
Any ideas?
Yeah. First thing, again, if we accept this number, we should deal with it. So to send them to the schools, even if their paper finished or still some family wait more than 2 years until they finish their administrative paper. But in these 2 years, you can't keep those children or those youth just waiting in the shelter. This is very dangerous. So minimum those people who's in the school age, they should go through the system, should find somehow way. Otherwise, as there is those who's bad people, there is a lot of people sharing the same value, the same mentality with the European country and believe in human rights and all this, but they don't have tools. They don't have any power. those people, we should invest with them to have culture club, social activity. I know there is a lot of activity through the German civil society, but still the language, still all these circumstances, we should find a partner from the refugee, with sharing the same value, the same mentality about human rights and democratic and liberal, and give them tools.
Absolutely.
They will serve in very well way in these topics.
I have to come back to Mayor Khamis for just a moment, because I know he has so many reactions to this, and it's a fundamental security question as well that needs to.
I think that the most important element is good information. People are misinformed about refugees. They must know what's going on. We have a typical example in Greece. In a northern town in Greece, in a school, the Association of Parents, they refused to admit refugee children with the argument that they were not vaccinated. It was false. All those stereotypes about the refugees make integration very, very difficult. It's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is the protagonist role of mayors, not only on the integration level. You find many, many mayors open to receive refugees in their cities while their governments refuse. The mayors of Madrid, of Barcelona, of Amsterdam, we have agreed that they can take refugees from Athens, but their governments refuse. And the second and the third thing is to tell you that I have participated on conferences and congresses and panels on refugees, and migrants, maybe more than 100 in my life. Because I was a university professor, I was the Greek ombudsman for many years, and now as a mayor. And I'm fed up with the hypocrisy. Millions of euros have been spent in order to organize conferences where everybody was very open in those issues and very pro-rights and everything. And when it comes to act, you see this hypocrisy, and I'm very, very sorry to say so and to realize what's going on.
I think many Syrians would agree with you on this. The workshop industrial complex, there's a sense that many are very uncomfortable with what it's achieved. To questions now. Anyone like to start us off? Please identify yourself. We'll start here in the front row.
My name is Alex Torpey, and my background will expose the bias in my questions, one of which I was a mayor formerly, and the other is that I belong to...
Where?
In New Jersey. Don't hold that against me. And the other is that I belong to this millennial generation. So we've talked, a lot of these themes so far have been about, obviously, the importance of local government, not just from a policy and program perspective, but also from some sort of citizenship identity perspective that we're increasingly seeing. In the United States and around the world, there's a lot of young people who have this incredible value of openness and interest in diversity, and in understanding other cultures, and just that being part of their daily life, so much so that I think many young people don't even think about it. It's just so ingrained in their consciousness. And many of those young people are also very passionate about some sort of social justice of some sort. And so my question is, in thinking about the long-term planning aspect of this crisis and these crises and all these different issues like this, how do we show many of these young people who often don't see that at the local level, that their impact on these issues is maybe the best way to impact some of these larger global challenges that are so hard to wrap their heads around? So are there any sort of practical ideas or insights that any of you can share about how to show young people that the best way, and probably the only way, to solve some of these global challenges is direct action at the local level and with local government?
Michael, any thoughts to kick us off?
Yeah, maybe I have one idea, and there's no silver bullet here, obviously, but just one way to think about it. And I agree, and this is a challenge in resilience building generally, that that in order to really change a city, to make it livable, sustainable, is not the work of 2 or 3 years, it's the work of a generation or two. And then when we talk about long-term integration of refugees, that's something that we should remember, that this is real long-term work. And the one place in the U.S. where maybe it's been done better than is in St. Louis, where the Bosnian refugees were really well integrated. And part of that probably has to do with the fact that Mayor Slay was there the last 20 years. He's retiring now, but like his continuity to see that through. So that's the tension on the one hand. On the other hand, to your point, that we need to show some progress and some quick wins now. So how can we, how do we demonstrate some movement on that? You can't say, let's work on this for the next 20 years and we'll see if it works. We got to show some progress now. And so one of the things we've been doing is working with an organization called Tactical Urbanism, which allows communities it teaches communities how to do, rather than try to revamp the entire street grid or the transportation plan or deal with an issue like refugees or migrants. It allows more tactical action in smaller communities to break it down in a way, let's just take over this one sidewalk triangle and see if we can change the traffic pattern in this micro area in a way that makes, demonstrates the success here. And that's been a really interesting way for us to begin to both try to push cities to be strategic and think long-term, which are the sort of big thoughts, but also engage their citizenry and their young citizenry often in more immediately gratifying sort of tactical ways that show progress.
As a millennial by 1 year, conveniently, I think also the long arc of history has played very well with our generation. We've seen a lot of young people step up and say, my grandparents were refugees. And I think that's been a big engagement factor. Case in point, my grandparents were refugees, my great-grandparents were refugees, and they were beautifully welcomed and integrated by the local community in Aleppo, Syria. So that's partially why I do what I do, and that got me out of my seat. So we're not supposed to use ourselves as data, but I do think I've seen a lot of that play out and people relating to their migration pattern. Questions? To identify yourself and...
Hi, I'm Sam Sleeve. I'm the Urban Learning Manager at the International Rescue Committee. My question is on this, what's been termed a divide between the humanitarian side of things and the development side of things. I mean, even the panels were sort of structured in terms of meeting the immediate needs and now thinking about long term. But my question is whether or not the panel has any ideas about how to turn that to divide into more of a continuum, so that what we're doing at the start is informing what we're doing in the long term, and what role concepts like resilience can play, what role like the opportunities that exist within cities can play in doing that.
Volker, any thoughts?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the big outcomes of this week, both from the 19th September summit as well as the President Obama summit, is precisely to define a bit more and to put in practice a number of things that would ensure that continuum. Just to give you a couple of examples, on education, on healthcare, on some of the core needs, there has always been this tradition in the past of having parallel structures in the humanitarian sphere, because systems are overwhelmed, so you create parallel education systems, you create parallel health systems, you try to, this is parallelity issue, and which actually disconnects it from the local community. It disconnects it from the service providers that are there for the host communities. And what we have seen is, if you have political willingness and if you have the financing coming in, you can actually ensure that you get it into the national service, into the local service providers, and you ensure the local ownership. And I think the biggest change and the most substantial one is the involvement of the World Bank and international financial institutions. I mean, for years, in fact, it was Mr. Guterres who raised it with the World Bank a couple of years ago, because that was really the missing link in all of this. Mm-hmm. The World Bank looks at displacement and the impact of displacement and on refugee issues in a way that takes into account broader macroeconomic policies, financing, lending schemes, concessional loans. And the World Bank, you saw the president of the World Bank speech. I mean, that's a sea change in the engagement. And that, I think, will be quite significant in terms of how this continuum is going to be defined.
One more question. Here, the yellow shirt.
Thank you for this wonderful panel. My name is Suzanne Sahlul, and I'm with the Syrian Community Network based in Chicago. We're a small refugee support organization, and we work with all of the resettlement agencies to support the Syrian refugees who are coming in. Currently, we have about 110 families. That's about 360 individuals, people who have been displaced and injured, and they have many stories. And would love to see them here at Brookings to share their stories with you all. I wanted to commend the mayor of Greece to say that I was in Greece 2 times serving on medical missions, and I saw firsthand the generosity of the Greek people, and it was really wonderful to see. But I want to switch back to Chicago, where our mayor and a lot of the aldermen in Chicago passed a city resolution in November to welcome all refugees into our city, even though our governor had said that we don't want to welcome Syrian refugees. So that was a great moment. And also, they hosted a Thanksgiving dinner, which is an American tradition, to give the refugees that opportunity to be a part of the city. So that was great. So I just wanted to make that comment that cities do have the ability to welcome refugees. And one thing that is really amazing what's happened in Chicago is that the refugees themselves have united many faith groups together. We are always asked at churches and synagogues and mosques to present about the refugees, and I feel that now in Chicago, the greatest opportunity is that they have brought people together, people of different faiths and backgrounds who want to serve and help them so that they can better integrate in our city. So thank you.
Yeah, I wonder, just listening to that, I wonder, we were just in Chicago. It's one of our sort of cities, but it's we're just beginning the engagement there. We did a big workshop with the mayor and a diverse group of stakeholders. And one of the things that came up in Chicago is, Chicago's ravaged by violence. It's a city. It's city. And yet, when you talk to people of certain communities, they say that violence doesn't happen here. It happens in these other communities. So Chicago, and when we surfaced what the key issues were, it's equity, racism, trust in government, like all these. And I wonder, this is the idea of what resilient cities could do, is that they use experiences from one effort to inform another. And listening to you, I almost wonder whether or not positive experiences dealing with Syrian refugees might actually inform how Chicago deals with some of its other isolated and vulnerable populations. So that's the kind of thinking that we're trying to inspire, but it can go both ways in some ways.
There are 2 themes that have come up that we unfortunately don't have time to explore. One is money and financing and how to get more of it to the city level. And the other is agency, the agency of refugees participating in the policies that shape their lives, and the city's own agency within EU structures and federal structures, which could be another hour. Fortunately, we don't have time for. Please join me in thanking our panel.